Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. I'm so glad that you've joined me today. And I've got a very special guest joining me today. But before I introduce him, let me just say I have my new book out called Look Up. If you haven't ordered it already, it's available now. And so I know a lot of you pre-ordered it, but it came out on December the 31st. And it's talking about when Jesus said, when you see these things begin to happen, look up, for your redemption draws near. And the entire book just talks about redemption, what it means for us to be redeemed, which means everything Adam and Eve lost, we're going to get it back when Jesus returns, including a lot more. And so that's what the book is about. Very encouraging. It will talk about the end times, helping you to understand the end times, but more than that, it'll give you hope for what's just about to happen. Jesus said, when you see all these things happen, look up, but be prepared for the fact that you're about to be redeemed. So if that you haven't ordered the book, order the book. I know it will bless you. Also, we're going to Israel next November, December, and all the information there is on your screen. We would love to have you go with us. We're going to be there, I think, about 10 days, taking a tour, and it's going to be educational, inspirational. Can't wait to meet you guys that are going to go on the trip with us and spend some time with you in the Holy Land. So if you haven't already registered for that, the information is right there on your screen. And I'm excited today to have joining me best-selling author, end times expert, Bill Salus. Bill is the founder of Prophecy Depot Ministries. He has written 11 books, produced 14 DVDs. He's an author and speaker I've learned a lot from over the years. I'm very glad to have him joining me today to discuss a very important prophetic event, which is also a book Bill has written called Nuclear Showdown in Iran. Bill, thank you for being here.
Jimmy, thanks for having me on your program.
You bet. Well, listen, I've watched you for years and learned so much from you, and you're a scholar. I mean, you really are a researcher, and you go so deep into the things that you research. And so today we're going to talk about Iran. I want to start because you're here today, and several things have just happened in the news, and one is this earthquake that just happened in Turkey and Syria. The death toll that I heard this morning was 5,000. Over 5,000 people that have been killed. And of course, Jesus said there's going to be earthquakes, famines, pestilences, like that. This is a big earthquake in a very strategic area of the world. Do you think anything significant about that other than just the devastation and all that?
Well, I think it's like Jesus had said, and there would be great earthquakes. He talks about in Luke, Matthew 24, he talks about earthquakes in diverse places.
Right.
This is a great earthquake, 7.5. I was in a 6.6 earthquake I lived in Big Bear Lake, California around 1990, I think it was. And it threw all my TVs off the shelf. My piano went through the wall. All the food and stuff came out of the cabinets. And they say that you go up another 7.5, that's almost 1,000 times greater
terrible.
intensity.
Yeah.
And the World Health Organization today came out and said they think there could be up to maybe about 20,000 killed individuals when they get through all the rubble and everything.
Wow. I read an article this morning that said that this fault, and I believe they call it the Syrian-African fault that runs right through Israel. And they're saying that, of course, Israel has a big earthquake like that about once every century. And they haven't had a huge earthquake. I think it was 1927, the last time they had one like this. So this, and of course, the Bible prophesies huge earthquake in Jerusalem, huge earthquake, the Gog and Magog war, and so, which is in the same region. So very significant. China, we had the balloon that flew over the United States from China. And China is not in this prophecy, the Ezekiel 38 and 39 prophecy. Now, Ezekiel 38 and 39 says many people are with you. So, you have that. But China, they're very provocative. They have, infiltrated our businesses, stolen our state secrets. They've infiltrated, they say, every college campus in America. And now they have this balloon that flies over America. What do you think about that? You think it's just a dumb thing that they let a weather balloon go free, or do you think it's more than that?
Well, I think everything is calculated with China. Yeah. They are actually also talking with Saudi Arabia about trying to replace the petrodollar with the yen,
right,
which would really hurt our economy as well.
Yeah.
China has been calculating for quite some time to sort of dethrone America as the superpower because they want to replace us and usurp themselves on it. So no, I think that balloon was very strategic. They went over all the important sites across the country, and basically got a lot of intelligence. Some people are thinking, well, what if they were to launch a nuclear weapon, an EMP, electromagnetic pulse from that? Because you could maybe put one of those on without being detected. An electromagnetic pulse is basically a nuclear weapon that spreads, hit at a certain burst altitude, exploded at a certain burst altitude, goes out like a speed of light, a canopy, and everything underneath it electronically gets fried out.
Right.
If you launch a burst altitude of 180 miles up, I believe it is, you can take out the whole country. So, they weren't that high, but, they could certainly take out a state.
And we've been warned about this for many years.
That's right.
About EMP. It's not that sophisticated. And then, like you said, that could happen. So, there are evil people in the world today. And now the Chinese people, I believe, are precious. And there's a huge revival happening, a lot of Christians in China. But the Chinese government, they're evil. They're dictators. They're evil. They don't allow the church. They don't allow Christianity. But they do want to. I don't know if they have the same belief system as Iran, as in we're Satan and to destroy us. But they certainly want to shift in power.
Right.
They want to see the East, predominant over the West. So let's talk about Vladimir Putin for just a minute. The war in Ukraine is so concerning on so many levels. Mm-hmm. But Ezekiel 38 is addressed to a man named Gog. Mm-hmm. And it just seems as though Vladimir Putin matches the description of a madman in that area of the world, mm-hmm. who is, bent on power and ultimately to go down and take spoil from Israel. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about Vladimir Putin? I mean, is there, because you understand so much about, Bible prophecy, do you think that there's an end game other than Ezekiel 38, or do you even think he knows the end game? Do you think he's just kind of on a rampage or what?
Well, I don't think Vladimir Putin knows the end game like we would know the end game from the Bible prophecies. But there are some parallels with his invasion of Ukraine with Ezekiel 38. Now, of course, Ezekiel 38 is an invasion against Israel with a whole coalition of countries, much more than just Russia going into Ukraine. But Ezekiel 38:10 talks about this Russian leader who could very well, depending on when Ezekiel 38 happens, could be Vladimir Putin, but we can't pin that tail on that face just yet because we don't know where he'll be at that time. Right. But it talks about him getting evil thoughts would arise in his mind. He would invade a peaceful people for spoil and gain, and of course Ukraine is sort of the breadbasket of Europe.
Yes.
There's a lot of natural gas and things, and wheat and corn top producing over there. So, we see that's the same reason he's going to come with his troops and hordes in Ezekiel 38, a peaceful people dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates, for plunder and booty, great plunder and great spoil. So I saw some parallels when that happened. Maybe it's a little trial run, but not that he knows he's going to go against Israel. But at some point, God will put hooks in the jaw of Russia and their coalition that will include Turkey, Iran. There's 9 populations listed in their Ezekiel's ancient vocabulary. It would include some of the North African countries of Ethiopia, Tunisia, Sudan, Somalia, perhaps Morocco, some of the breakaway Soviet Union republics, some of the stands, Kazakhstan, etc. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge coalition coming against Israel. Oh, yeah. And I think Israel at that time will have proven itself to be a very formidable foe because we've got some prophecies we'll talk about today that I think positions Israel into a safer, greater country at that point in time.
Well, one of the things I really enjoy about your teaching is you're more methodical than me in the sense that you talk about the Psalm 83 war as being a very specific war, has not been fought yet, more regional war. Mm-hmm. Then you talk about Elam, and that's what we're going to talk about, and which is a part of current-day Iran, about a third of current-day Iran in this prophecy of Jeremiah 49. And then you talk about Ezekiel 38 and 39. So you really you layer it more than I would. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying, and you're right. I mean, I've learned so much from you in that. So I want to talk about, because we were talking before the show, what's unfolding right now with Iran. This has been happening for a long time. And so we're now looking at a very, very, impending crisis. It's already a crisis. And Israel is sitting there in the crosshairs. Iran is very provocative. They're provocative in the sense that they're talking about, how they're going to destroy. They've been talking about destroying Israel for many years. But this is a very public rhetoric that's going back and forth between Israel and Iran. And now Netanyahu is the president. But this nuclear showdown with Iran has been happening for many years. Why don't you talk about that and just talk about how this has unfolded?
Yeah, sort of a little brief overview of history would be good, I think, for the viewers, Jimmy. And I remember Iran, let's start off with this, is the elephant in the room in the Middle East. It is the big problem for Israel, and not only Israel, but a lot of the Arab states, the Sunni states like Saudi Arabia, and are also very concerned about Iran trying to spread its hegemony, as it's doing with its proxies of Hezbollah and Syria and Hamas, etc. They're concerned that Iran's going to spread its hegemony more and more throughout the whole Middle East, try to set up a Shiite caliphate because they're Shiites versus Sunni Saudi Arabia. But there's the existential threat to Israel's existence. And I remember Benjamin Netanyahu even talking to George Bush about this when he was president way back when. But if you fast forward up to about 2010, we'll take the clock back to 2010. You had Israel began its covert operations against Iran. It did the Stuxnet worm virus.
Yes.
Shut down a whole bunch of centrifuges. They also, for 2 years around that time to 2012, assassinated 4 nuclear Iranian scientists and injured one very badly as well. I remember 2012 was when Leon Panetta was the Secretary of Defense for the Obama administration, and he sincerely thought at that time that Israel would strike Iran's nuclear program. That's 13 years ago, Jim.
That's really amazing. That's really amazing.
Right, and then you go forward a couple of years, John Kerry, the then Secretary of State for Barack Obama, he had said that in his estimation, Iran was 2 months away from breaking out to a nuclear weapons threshold. And of course, 2015, shortly thereafter, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action treaty, was put together with the P5+1 Iran. So you had France, Britain, Russia, China, the USA, and +1 would be Germany, all came together and put together this deal. However, Donald Trump, fulfilling one of his presidential campaign promises in May of 2018, withdrew from that peace treaty. And then Iran seized the opportunity from that point forward to start advancing fast forward its nuclear program without any checks and balances. So we find out in December of 2020 that they had gotten up to 2.5 tons of enriched uranium, which was 12 times beyond the limit they were allowed to do in the JCPOA. They started putting advanced centrifuges together. They started producing 20% uranium. Now they went up to 60% uranium recently. Now there are some concerns are already hitting 90% uranium, which is a threshold for a nuclear weapon. But in the midst of all that, there was threats that Israel would preempt a strike, as is still a threat today. And the defense minister, Amir Hatami of Iran at the time, said, well, if you do a preemptive strike, we'll raise Tel Aviv, we'll raise Haifa. In other words, an all-out war coming against the major cities inside of Israel. And the thing just keeps on going. And then in November of 2020, another nuclear scientist was assassinated called Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. And then after that assassination, Iran stopped allowing the IAEA to come back in December of 2020, doing any more further inspections. So we'll show you can't come back in and inspect. They're taking out our scientists. And then in April of 2021, they announced advanced centrifuges. And on April 11th, the day after, there was a huge explosion and a planned bomb attack in the Natanz nuclear site that they figured Mossad had done that. And that means they had been planning that for a while to get a bomb inside of there. Shows you how incredible Israel's Mossad is to do that sort of thing. And then in October 2021, the Knesset approved Israel 500 billion shekels, $1.5 billion to attack Iran. That was October 2021. And then May of 2022, Israel launched one of its biggest military exercises in decades called Chariots of Fire. Right. And that was all geared up to invading and attacking Iran's nuclear program, also preparing for a multi-front proxy war ensuing as a result of that, and also preparing for casualties inside of Israel. So they set up triage and things like that. So it was a very extensive and exhaustive military exercise. And now, then recently in November of last year, just as we turned the threshold into the new year, they announced they had a hypersonic ballistic missile that can reach Israel in 400 seconds, which is 6.66 minutes.
That's just unbelievable.
And hypersonic meaning, and it's a ballistic missile, so it can carry a nuclear warhead. And hypersonic means it travels 5 times the speed of sound. And it's the type of thing that can take out missile defense systems, this hypersonic missile, and it can also avoid being detected by missile defense systems. So all the stakes are so high right now that Israel has, in my estimation, has to take an action, and has to take an action very soon.
Absolutely. Well, you have that short a period of time to defend yourself if you even think they have nuclear capabilities. you have to do something. And one of the things that I believe, and I want to talk about this because we're going to talk about the Psalm 49, I'm sorry, the Jeremiah 49 prophecy here about Elam, but the hook in the jaw. So, and you have different scenarios that play out in what you believe is going to happen. Well, we know that the Jeremiah 49 Elam prophecy is going to happen. We know that the Psalm 83 prophecy is going to happen. We know that Ezekiel 38 is going to happen. So, but the hook in the jaw, Iran says in this video that they produced, when you strike us. So they're pretty much planning on being struck by. They've been being attacked by Israel for 13 years over the nuclear stuff. But when you strike us, we're going to come in and we're going to do this, this, and this. We're going to raise Haifa. We're going to do all this stuff. But the proxies, the Psalm 83 countries, do you believe that when Israel strikes Iran, I don't believe there's any doubt that Israel will strike Iran. They have to. The only alternative is to wait to be hit by Iran. And one strike of a nuclear weapon in the right place in Israel, they're gone.
Right.
So do you believe that when Israel strikes Iran, first of all, you believe that that would be Elam, is that correct?
I do believe that.
Yeah.
Elam is one part of modern-day Iran.
Talk about that.
Okay, the location of Elam in ancient times territorially was always secluded from Persia. Elam hugged the Persian Gulf. Occupies about a third the size of modern-day Iran. It was always separated, and still is geographically, by the Zagros Mountains.
Right.
So the Persia's on the other side of those, and most all of northern and central and southern Iran. But Elam is on the western coast. Actually, Elam is Iran itself. I just wanted to throw this in here real quick because it's going to come into play when we talk about this. Iran is 90% seismic. We were talking about the earthquake in Turkey. Well, Iran is 90% seismic. And they have a nuclear power plant in Elam called the Bushehr nuclear reactor. We want to talk about that because it may come into play in the prophecy. But where that nuclear power plant is built, it sits on 3 tectonic plates. It's a terrible location.
That's not a good idea.
Nuclear weapon, right on the corner of the Gulf state and of the Persian Gulf. And in April 10 of 2013, they had a 6.8 earthquake that killed 37 people and injured 850. Wow. 6 days later, down in southern Iran, by the Pakistani border, they had a 7.7 that killed 35 people and injured 112. Now, when this happened, the Gulf states, the Gulf Cooperation Council states across from the Gulf, who are rich in oil but very poor in water. Right. They rely on the Persian Gulf for their water. They have 2/3 of the world's desalinization plants are located in these countries, which would include Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Bahrain, UAE, and Qatar. When this happened, that nuclear weapon and the earthquake in the Bushehr nuclear reactor, they did a study and it was reported 3 months later in 2013 with Al Arabia. And I want to read the quote to it, okay? Because it's going to come into play because Saudi Arabia and these countries are very concerned about this nuclear reactor and an attack on that by Israel. It says the risk of radiation from Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant, if there is an accident, is extremely high to the GCC states. Studies suggest that any leak from that plant will affect the GCC's water supplies, especially the desalinization plant operations. In the event of the radiation leak, clouds of radioactive material will drift to the GCC states in just 15 hours because of the winds that blow through there.
Yeah.
While the radiation would affect only 10% of the Iranian population because of those Zagros Mountains. In other words, the radiation would go to the east, to the west, across to the Gulf countries, not necessarily back over to Tehran because of those mountains. It would only affect 10% of the Iranian population. In the GCC states, it would affect 40 to 100% of the population. So that's another reason they're very concerned about Iran's nuclear program, especially in the Elam territory there. The Elam territory we're talking about also is where they have that missile, the hypersonic missiles and the other missiles they have. They used to be able to say we could get to Israel in eight minutes. Now they're saying 6.66 minutes with a hypersonic missile. But that's the same territory where they have the underground missile silos, right? And where they have portable rocket launchers, because they got to be the closest to the west side of Iran to get to Israel, which is their target, of course. So that is a very strategic location with a nuclear reactor there. The nuclear reactor, Bashar nuclear reactor, was being built in the 70s by the Germans. In the revolution in 1979, the Germans got out of there because the Ayatollah revolution came in. And then Iran tried to build on that nuclear reactor, but they couldn't finish it up, so they called Russia in 1995 to complete that nuclear reactor. It's the crown jewel of Iran's nuclear program, but it's a 45 or so year facility with a 35-year-old cooling system and no one in it trained to handle a nuclear disaster on the level like Fukushima disaster that happened. So this is a hotbed right now and a big target for Israel because they got to take out those missile launchers, and we're going to read in the prophecy that this area, the bow is going to be broken. In other words, they won't be able to launch missiles according to this prophecy.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let me start with this. Jeremiah 49. Again, I want to talk about Bill's book here. Nuclear Showdown in Iran, and it says revealing the ancient prophecy which Isaiah 49. This is very well researched, a really good book if you want to read something that helps you understand what's about to happen. Bill and I both believe that this is something that could happen. It could happen any day now. But let me begin with Jeremiah 49, and you can just comment on this. It says, the word of the Lord that came to Jeremiah the prophet against Elam in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah king of Judah, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the foremost of their might. So talk about that.
Okay. Well, he introduces it during the reign of King Zedekiah and the last year of it. Zedekiah was the last king of Israel before they went into captivity, the final deportation into Babylon. And Jeremiah, thereby we'd say around 596 is when BC was when he wrote this prophecy. And it starts off by saying that the Lord is going to break the bow of Elam at the foremost of their might. Now, of course, Iran is not, if this is, and it says, and we'll read in a moment, the last verse says it happens in the latter days.
Right.
So if this were to happen in the latter days or around this modern time, we're not talking about a real bow with arrows, because even if you had fire on the end, fire-tipped arrows, they're not going to even get past the Persian Gulf. We're talking about missile launch.
Sure.
And God is going to, for a reason, we'll get into the other verses, going to not allow Iran to launch missiles somewhere. And these are lethal missiles because he breaks the bow at the foremost of their might. So, the foremost of their might today would probably be their nuclear program. Right. So he's going to break the bow. Now, Isaiah 22:6 tells us in Elam's history, they were expert archers. So it's sort of an interesting thing that God picks up in Jeremiah. That the bow is going to be, was always their weapon of preferred choice in ancient times, is going to be broken. No missiles are going to be able to be launched, no hypersonic missiles, no 6.66 minutes to Israel, is how I would look at that if it's for our time, which I do believe it is.
Yeah.
So he's going to prevent them from launching missiles, lethal missiles, somewhere.
Well, then this is verse 36. Against Elam I will bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven and scatter them toward all those winds. There shall be no nation where the outcast of Elam will not go. Now that's pretty interesting.
Right. The idiom of the scattering with the four winds from the four quarters of heaven is a picture of worldwide dispersion.
Right.
And he says there'll be no nations, plural, where the exiles will not go. So this is another reason why I personally believe it's a nuclear scenario, because it sounds like a humanitarian crisis ensues as a result that we're going to read in a moment that a disaster is what's going to be caused here. And I believe what happens is it's a nuclear disaster because of that Bashar nuclear reactor there possibly gets taken out. Just like we read about a study, the Arab states are worried about the very same thing.
Right.
And the people have to scatter. The indigenous population has got to get out of there. And not just to the neighboring countries, but throughout the whole nations of the world. Many Iranians look at this prophecy that have converted from Islam to Christianity, which is the fastest growing evangelical population in the world.
Right.
They look at this as an exit strategy where they can leave Iran and they can preach the gospel to the nations of the world. Many of these Iranians are on fire for the Lord. And I tell them, I've been on Iranian TV shows through Iran Alive Ministries with Hormuz Sharia. I tell them it's not an exit strategy. It's like, you can see in a minute when we read this, it's a disaster that forces them to leave. So, and I would encourage them, and I do on these shows, that be prepared. You have to have an exit strategy before this happens, not after.
But isn't it interesting, Bill, to me, because Bible prophecy is so exact This is what's happening in the world right now. This is current events. You don't have to use any imagination for this to happen in very quickly. This is verse 37. I will cause Elam to be dismayed before their enemies and before those who seek their life. I will bring disaster upon them, my fierce anger, says the Lord, and I will send the sword after them until I have consumed them.
Right. So we have a lot of clues right there, okay? Let's first address, why is there going to be a disaster? Why is this burden against Elam being foretold by Jeremiah? Because the Lord is angry. He's fiercely angry, and he's going to bring about a disaster. I believe the Lord is fiercely angry with Iran's leadership presently. He wasn't angry with King Cyrus. King Cyrus is one of the most notable kings in the Bible, even though he wasn't Jewish back in the time of the Persian.
The Lord called him his anointed.
That's right. Cyrus, my shepherd. And first, he wasn't angry. I don't believe he was angry with the Shah, who was deposed in 1979. But I think he's extremely angry with these mullahs and ayatollahs now who want to wipe Israel off the map. They want to raise Tel Aviv. They are persecuting Christians. The Lord is doing supernatural evangelism over there. Dreams, visions, miracles, and healings, and they're persecuting them. You can't even have an underground church over there. You get thrown in jail, you get beaten up, and run the risk of losing your life. Then it says the disaster is going to be of the magnitude that Iran will stand in awe. It says they'll be dismayed before their enemies. In the Hebrew languages, they'll stand in awe, like shock and awe, right? And but it says enemies, plural. So who, at the time this happens, there has to be a menu of enemies of Iran. Well, we got international communities concerned. That's why they've been trying to do that JCPOA, revive it again, because Iran is threatening to shut down the Persian Gulf if there's an attack. We still have about a quarter of the world's oil going through the Persian Gulf. That's a legitimate threat. You've got Israel's very concerned because Iran wants to wipe Israel off the map. That's another enemy number 2. The Gulf Cooperative Council states, you got the enemies over there. The Arabs are very concerned about Iran. So I think we also have that criterion in play. The reason I don't think it's an earthquake that causes the disaster is because it says, I will send the sword after them until I've consumed them. And the sword tends to be either literal, a sword in the Bible, or a typology of a military invasion.
Right. Well, the United States, too. At this point, the United States, the most recent military exercises that Israel had just a few weeks ago, the United States was a part of that. And so at least today, it seems though we would be in that list of enemies, potentially.
Right.
Verse 38, I will set my throne in Elam. I will destroy from there the king and the princes, says the Lord. Now that's interesting, when the Lord says he's going to set his throne there.
Right. And I want to address that. Before I address that, I want to say he's going to destroy from there the kings and the princes you just read, part B of Jeremiah 49:38b. Why is the Lord fiercely angry with Iran? Because they've got bad leadership.
Right.
How do we know that? Because he's going to destroy the kings and the princes. He would not destroy good kings and princes.
Right.
Why? Because they want to launch something lethal somewhere. That's why he's going to break the bow at the foremost of their might, so he can prevent them from doing that. Where is that destination that they want to launch it to? Well, it wasn't Iraq. They were in a war of attrition between 1980 and 1988, where they launched thousands of missiles into Iraq, and the bow wasn't broken then.
Right.
I believe it's because they want to launch weapons into Israel. And so the Lord's going to destroy from their kings and princes. But the good news, the first 4 verses are not necessarily good news for Iran. We just talked about the disaster and stuff. But the last 2 verses have got these Iranian Christians extremely excited. You just read one of the last 2 verses, because he's going to set his throne up in Elam. Now, what is that supposed to mean, right? The Hebrew word is kisseh, K-I-S-S-E. Same word used in Jeremiah 3, verse 17. I will set my throne up in Jerusalem. Isaiah talks about heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. It's the same, talking about the same word, kisseh. So is the Lord literally going to set a throne there? Is when Jesus Christ returns, is he going to set a secondary palace there? Cyrus did. King Cyrus, he moved his capital to Susa, which was the ancient capital of Elam. It can also mean put authority, someone of authority over the area. I write about the different definitions in the book. But it's very interesting that they very encouraged the Iranian Christians, because the Lord's going to set his throne in Elam.
I love that. And then verse 39, the last verse here, it shall come to pass in the latter days, I will bring back the captives of Elam, says the Lord. So this scenario here, there's going to be a dispersion, but then ultimately they're going to be brought back. So do you see that as when it says in the latter days, is that the millennium? Is that still, the tribulation? Or what do you think about that?
Well, it's the same Hebrew words used in Ezekiel 38 about in the latter days, when the prophecy takes place. So I think it might have a double meaning. One is the prophecy itself in full happens in the latter days. It could also carry over into the millennium, which is when they will come back.
Right.
The dispersed. So the way I look at that is, first of all, the Christians right now in Iran right now will be raptured. I believe in a pre-trib rapture.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay.
Yeah.
They'll be raptured. But those who are not believers, who get dispersed into the nations of the world, many of them will become believers during the tribulation period. Mm-hmm. And they won't all survive because of the perils of the tribulation period, but some of them will. Yeah. And I believe at that point, Jesus Christ will bring them back. Some translations say, I will return the captives, or I will restore their fortunes of Elam. Another good news for the Iranian Christians. They're excited about that. So I do believe that at the end of the tribulation period in the Messianic kingdom, those who are not believers presently, who do become believers subsequently during the tribulation, the Lord will bring them back. There'll be remnants in the Messianic kingdom of Jewish people, Egyptians, Assyrians, Jordanians, Iranians. There'll be many other Gentile remnants also go in the Messianic kingdom.
It's phenomenal. I want to once again talk about your book here, Nuclear Showdown in Iran. Now, Bill, you have DVDs, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have a DVD on this?
I do, yeah, teaching DVD.
Okay, Prophecy Depot?
ProphecyDepot.com.
ProphecyDepot.com. So go on ProphecyDepot.com. We'll put the information there on the screen. You've got books, you've got DVDs, and this just makes such an intriguing topic, especially in the days that we live in, because everybody's thinking about it. I mean, it's just, we were over in Israel in December, and we were driving down to the Sea of Galilee. We were in our bus, and a fighter jet came over our bus. It sounded like it came right over the top of our bus, but it was probably 2,000 or 3,000 feet above us. And our driver said they're going to bomb Iran in Syria, the Iranians in Syria.
Wow.
I mean, it's just very real that you're just right there. So these are the things happening in the news. Bill, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. And we hope that you've enjoyed this program today. And Bill's going to be back with me now again in the future. We're going to be talking about some more of the prophecies that have yet to come true. Hope this is a blessing to you. I'll see you next time here on the Tipping Point Show. God bless you.